Good morning and welcome to yet another exciting edition of China Now with me, Makiza Latifa. It's always a pleasure to bring you the only show dedicated to uncovering the biggest story shaping China and its relationship with the world. Thank you for joining us. As always, we kick things off with China Currents, your go-to segment for the latest developments straight from China. Our host, Chris, is on standby with major updates, including China's groundbreaking progress in cancer treatment, the swift deployment of Chinese rescue teams to Myanmar after the devastating 7.7 magnitude earthquake on March 28, 2025, and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's diplomatic mission to Russia, which wrapped up on April 2nd. There's more ahead, so stay with us. We're just getting started.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started. Welcome to China Currents, your weekly news report on the latest developments in China. I'm Chris, and in this episode, China's breakthrough on treating cancers. China sends rescue teams to Myanmar, and Chinese Foreign Minister visits Russia. First, let's see how China found a new therapy to kill cancers. On March 29th, according to Chinese media Yitai, China became the world leader in the number of original drugs entering clinical trials over the past 10 years, surpassing the United States. A statistical report by Tsinghua University and an ex-pharma database revealed that in 2024, China developed 704 new drugs. That's 264 more than the United States, accounting for 38% of the global total. Notably, China's research not only leads in quantity but also boldly tackles the most challenging task, treating cancer. On January 22nd, Professor Zhao Yixiang's team from Guangxi Medical University published a new anti-cancer method on Cell. They conducted extensive experiments on monkeys, successfully extending the survival time of those with late-stage cancer by more than 50%. In subsequent clinical trials, 20 patients with late-stage drug-resistant cancer received full therapy, and these patients separately suffer from liver, ovarian, colon, lung, breast, esophageal, melanoma, and cervical cancers. And in 90% of the cases, tumors shrank or stopped growing. No severe adverse reactions or significant neutralizing antibody responses were observed, demonstrating the safety of the approach. So how did Professor Zhao achieve this? The therapy, known scientifically as oncolytic virus therapy, essentially works by turning tumor cells into pigs. Tumors are notoriously difficult to treat because they can disguise themselves as healthy cells, deceiving the immune system. Professor Zhao integrated the gene encoding a pig cell porcine into Newcastle disease virus, that's NDV, constructing the recombinant oncolytic virus NDV-GT that selectively infects cancer cells. Once infected, these cancer cells begin to produce an enzyme typically found only in pigs. To the human immune system, it appears as if pork is circulating in the bloodstream, prompting the immune system to mobilize and clear the abnormal cells from healthy tissues swiftly. In this way, by disrupting the camouflage of cancer cells, the immune system effectively controls the disease in late-stage patients. Remarkably, one patient even experienced complete remission. Essentially, this approach induces a deliberately engineered hyperacute rejection. While hyperacute rejection is a fatal complication in organ transplantation, Professor Zhao has ingeniously harnessed it as a key to combat cancer. In addition to its impressive efficacy, Professor Zhao's discovery holds significant implications for the Global South. The NDV was originally a strain of avian influenza virus that once wreaked havoc in Britain. However, when humans are infected with it, most cases are asymptomatic, with only a few individuals experiencing mild fever or flu-like symptoms. This characteristic makes NDV an ideal vaccine vector. By disguising NDV as another virus, the human immune system can learn to recognize these viruses under relatively mild conditions and produce the corresponding antibodies. Before China used it to treat cancer, other countries also used it to make vaccines for Ebola and COVID-19. According to the New York Times, in 2021, Professor Peter Palese developed a novel coronavirus vaccine called NDV-HXPS. Because NDV is inherently highly transmissible among poultry, the production of these vaccines primarily relies on inexpensive eggs rather than costly raw materials and sophisticated equipment required for RNA vaccines like those from Moderna. As a result, countries such as Brazil, Vietnam, Thailand, and Mexico have achieved complete independent production. Thailand's health minister said this vaccine production is produced by Thai people for Thai people. Ms. Taylor of the Duke Global Health Innovation Center was sympathetic. I could understand why that would really be such an attractive prospect. They've been at the mercy of global supply chains. For many years, big pharma companies in the United States and Europe have monopolized the research, manufacturing, and sales of anti-cancer drugs. Now the work of Professor Zhao Yongxiang and numerous other Chinese experts not only breaks that monopoly, but may also pave the way for Global South to establish its own production lines for anti-cancer drugs. Next up, China is also saving lives in Myanmar. On March 28th, a powerful magnitude 7.9 earthquake struck Myanmar, triggering an immediate international response. Within just 18 hours, the Chinese medical team from Yunnan province arrived in the affected region, becoming the first international rescue group on the ground. By March 30th, a 118-member China International Rescue Team comprising earthquake specialists, engineers, medical personnel, and rescue dogs had landed at Myanmar's airport. The following day, the first batch of China's $30 million humanitarian aid package was dispatched, including 1,200 tents, 8,000 blankets, and over 40,000 first aid kits, all delivered via chartered aircraft. China also pledged additional emergency supplies such as drinking water and ready-to-eat meals. According to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, as of March 31st, over 400 Chinese rescue experts and medical workers were actively participating in relief efforts. On the other hand, Trump promised aid to Myanmar either. But the same day, he also announced plans to cut nearly all remaining jobs at USAID and effectively shut down the agency. Sarah Charles, a former senior USAID official, told Reuters, "I suspect we will see very shortly Chinese teams showing up, if they haven't already, possibly Turkish, Russian, Indian teams really making their presence known in support of people that are really suffering right now in Thailand and Myanmar. And the US won't be there." Moving on April 2nd, China's Foreign Minister Wang concluded a three-day official visit to Russia. Just on March 27th, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Overchuk spoke at China's Boao Forum for Asia. He stated that China and Russia are exploring ways of how to cooperate and work together to improve the living standard of people in both countries. In fact, one major area of cooperation is energy. Back in December last year, the China-Russia East Route natural gas pipeline was completed in full. Stretching over 5,000 kilometers, it transports natural gas from Siberia all the way to Shanghai. According to Chinese state media, the pipeline can deliver up to 38 billion cubic meters of gas to China each year, enough to supply 130 million households annually. As of February, the pipeline had already delivered over 90 billion cubic meters of gas to China, boosting China's energy security. And it's not just China benefiting from this pipeline. China is the world's largest importer of natural gas. According to Russia's Sputnik News, Alexei Grivach, deputy director of the National Energy Security Fund, said that since Russia began piping gas to China in 2019, it has earned more than $18 billion from the exports. With the pipeline now fully operational, Russia is expected to earn between $8 billion and $10 billion annually from gas sales to China starting from 2025. That's all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts or comments, please leave it below. See you next time.
And that wraps up China Currents with Chris. I'm sure you are now fully up to speed with China's latest developments. Now let's shift gears to Thinkers Forum, where we engage with brilliant minds, offering deep insights into China's role on the global stage. In this edition, we bring you a fascinating conversation between Professor Shen, a renowned expert in international politics from Fudan University, and Ron Arndt, an American theoretical physicist, publisher, and founder of the Arndt Review. Get ready for an insightful discussion on key issues shaping China's interaction with the world. Let's dive in.
Hello, Mr. Ronald. Hello, guys.
Hi, Professor Shi. I'm very glad to hear, very honored to be on, your show and talking with you
My
about
great
those
pleasure.
important issues.
Frankly speaking, one of the most important characteristics of Trump's second terms is we finding a gap between the perceptions from peoples and the real performance of Trump's teams. When he win the election again, one of the most important prediction of his second team is people wish that this guy will become more mature, which means he grow up, got enough confidence, enough experience when he take this office for first terms, and then he will become more experienced to deal with those very complicated or sophisticated issues represented by Russia and Ukraine conflict. But the reality is, seeing that these guys, the only experience he got from his first team is he believed he understand everything. The only mistake for his first teams is he did not pick the right guys to realize, to deliver his own really ideas. He just find these people did not loyalty to him enough. And so he just picked a teams. Its first priority is whether you are loyalty to Trump himself or his personal enough or not. Did not consider whether these guys are qualified for their positions, did not consider too much on their real skills or experience to dealing with these sophisticated and complex things. The challenge here is Trump himself did not have a very proper or comprehensive training on IR relations or diplomatic knowledges or skills. He did not even have first-hand experience by doing diplomatic ways, which means you need patient, long-term goals, have a very detailed, pragmatic, path designing skills to realize the goal. He just mentioned the goal. I wish I have a goals. I wish in my understanding these things can be solved in these ways. He didn't even have the so-called those sense of geopolitics, which means this guy refused to recognize that the issues like Ukraine-Russia conflict has a long history background, is very complicated. There's too many actors, they are interesting, involved. They cannot act according to a very simple orders from Washington, from the White House. In short, he is not the only dominators of these games. He must consider other actors' requirement for their own interest and so on. So you'll find something, his behavior, how to say, you can say that this behavior is ridiculous, but sometimes you just find these guys, they are not got the sense. He don't have any sense what he say when he say that I can finish or stop the conflict in the first 24 hours when he take the office in take the White House again. It's just like that. He called Putin. Putin say, "Hey, you guys, welcome back. I will send you a gift. Let's stop these ceasefires." And he called to the Kiev, say, "If you don't stop the fight, I will cut off this intelligence and military." So boom, you did and done everything just after these two calls. It's a very idealized scenarios, which is, frankly speaking, mission impossible in the real world. But the challenge here is Trump is too quickly to say his idea out without considering how to deliver these plans. And such kind of mission impossible proposals, he also providing a very high political reputations, like a gambling on it. So here comes the challenges. If he cannot deliver these proposals, he will losing face and got and disadvantages in US domestic political structures. But on the other side, if he insisted these proposals, he don't have enough or proper persons and the policy tools to deliver that proposals. Frankly speaking, in my point of views, if Trump want to launch this ceasefire. The experience from Nixon in Vietnam War is quite clear. At phase one, you should not cut off the aid to the Ukraine. You need to increasing your military aid to Ukraine and help Ukraine to rebuild the balance in the battlefield and raising the pressure to the Moscow so that Moscow will have the willing to sink these ceasefire considerations. But what he did is very different. In Munich, before he launched the negotiate with Russia, he just showed his every card. He said that this war you cannot win. We will not continue to invest from the Ukraine side. And that deliver a very clear signals to Russia side. If the Russia just keep moving on the battlefield and just wait, and finally, I will get everything we want. Frankly speaking, the second terms of Trump administrations, he still did not really learn any useful things from his first terms, and it's providing too much uncertainties, not only to United States, not only to the Russian-Ukraine conflict, but maybe to the whole world, not only on the geopolitical issues, but also on the comprehensive U.S. foreign policy framework will become filled with too much uncertainties in the coming 4 years.
I generally agree with that. In other words, the truth is Trump simply, doesn't have a solid understanding of these issues. And the problem is many of the people he's picked, for example, as defense secretary, Hespeth. I mean, basically, he was simply a talking head, a pundit on Fox News. And I mean, he doesn't have any experience. The Secretary of Defense right now is somebody who has no experience running a large organization. He doesn't really know any of these issues. And the same thing with many of the other people that he's brought in, like, even Marco Rubio, for example, or Secretary of State. I mean, Marco Rubio basically was a senator who focused heavily, for example, on Cuban policy, on some Latin American issues. And he doesn't really have the diplomatic experience that, for example, the foreign ministers of Russia or China or many other countries around the world have. So, I mean, again, it's really a government made up of people who don't have, I think, a good understanding of what's going on in the world and don't have a lot of experience. And in fact, people sometimes who do have a certain amount of experience, who do have a certain amount of knowledge, are simply blocked from holding any positions because, certain, foreign policy groups block them. For example, basically a former general, a commentator was picked by Tulsi Gabbard to be the briefer for the president of the morning. And he'd come out and criticized some of the ongoing slaughter of the Israelis in Gaza. And, once that came out, basically he was blocked from any appointment. So the problem is American foreign policy, or the American government in general, is under the control of a number of different powerful groups that can veto anybody who offends them on any given issue. And so, given all these sorts of vetoes, what you many times then get are the sort of people in place who don't really know what they're doing. And I mean, that certainly applies to Donald Trump. I mean, in fact, when you look at, for example, how he's gone back and forth in his public statements, I mean, on a day-to-day basis, he says one policy. Then 3 days later, he changes it. Then 3 days later, he changes it again. And I mean, that certainly doesn't give a lot of confidence either to our allies or to, for example, the countries who are considered our adversaries. And so, I mean, the American government is in a very disorganized state right now, which obviously is dangerous for the world. And, obviously, I think what we really should be doing is simply going for a peace agreement in Ukraine based on the terms as close as possible to what we could have gotten years ago with the Russians. In other words, a neutralized, demilitarized Ukraine that does not become part of NATO. That's what the Russians have demanded. That would be, I think, a reasonable solution to us, and it certainly would have saved hundreds of thousands of lives because this war wouldn't have broken out. So, I mean, I really think, the American government is simply entirely, it doesn't really know what it's doing on these issues. And the problem is many of these same foreign policy groups control both political parties in the United States. So, for example, in many ways, there's sometimes more of a continuity between Democrats and Republicans than the voters expect when they vote for the other side. And so I think, America is just in a very difficult position right now in foreign policy in these issues. And, I certainly hope we can get a peace agreement with the Russians over the Ukraine. And, we can certainly reestablish normal relations with Russia. But it's a difficult thing given that the Trump team doesn't seem to know what they're doing. I certainly agree with that. In other words, the whole thing is the tariffs that he's been talking about, the very large tariffs, I think would be disasters for the American economy, harmful for the rest of the world, but certainly disasters for the American economy. Talking about imposing gigantic tariffs on Canada and Mexico, our two neighbors, and, generally countries that are quite friendly with us. It's just a ridiculous policy. And nobody in the past, I think, probably would have considered it. It's causing, for example, tremendous dislocations because over the decades after NAFTA and after Trump's modification of NAFTA a few years ago, there's been a tremendous integration of the economies of Canada, Mexico, and the United States. For example, with regards to Canada, a lot of, for example, the auto companies are basically spread across the border. Their parts move back and forth. And suddenly to impose gigantic tariffs disrupts that part of the American industrial system. So, it just, Trump doesn't really know what he's doing on those issues. And, I think it's very damaging to the United States. And, at first, since Trump was viewed as somebody who would deregulate, who would support business, there was a sense that businesses in America would benefit from Trump's election. But if you look at the stock market right now, it's suffered a serious decline. And if, for example, the Trump tariffs go into effect, and if they cause an increase in inflation, that obviously would have a tremendously negative effect on the American economy. And also, for example, it would stop the Federal Reserve from having any chance of lowering interest rates in the future. So, the result of these tariff policies, I think, will be potentially disasters for America. And, America is also alienating America's allies on this point. In other words, with the European countries, with Canada, with Mexico, with other countries around the world that we have good relations with. We're basically harming them and alienating them with these tariff policies. So, again, if you're on the other side of the United States in geopolitical terms, I think when you see Trump implementing these policies, you should probably be gratified because, he's damaging America's position in the world. He's, hurting other countries, but he's hurting, I think, America most of all. And I think it's simply because Trump and most of the people around him simply don't understand the economics of these issues. And I think I think the policies are very bad policies.
From China's side, as a research fund for the Sino-US relationship, the tariff issues maybe is the most frustrated issues make the research field because just like Ron said that it's completely wrong. This policy, I never see that. I never think that I will make such kind of scenarios. Trump, just as a United States leaders, it seemed that he lived in the world mainly based on his own imaginations. It's not the real world. It's the world that he imagined. He believed the world is running like this way, but the real world is on this opposite side, on that way. And he has a very strong confidence on the effect of this tariff, but his understanding of this tariff effect and the running principles of this tariff, you cannot say it's completely wrong, but it's outdated. It's the tariff work maybe sometimes in the 18th or 19th centuries, but not the year 2025. The more important part is Trump did everything in the name of MAGA, which means Make America Great Again. And this American Great Again means United States will stable or make safer of his positions as a hegemonic powers. But Trump did not understand, or it seemed that he did not have any real knowledge on how US hegemonic works. That's the most pathetic part of his policies, especially on these tariff things. His tariff tools, just like Ms. Ron said that, it's de facto defeating rather than make United States great again. It's defeating from inside of US hegemonic systems when he raises comprehensive tariff war to everybody in the world other than United States. That make a very interesting and nearly mission impossible scenarios will happen. Nowadays, nearly every country and regions got the threat from the United States tariff, take the same positions, they revenge. They launch a same tariff war to fighting against United States production exporting to them. If finally it become a reality, which means United States raise its tariff war to everyone, every other countries raise the same tariff war, retaliate United States tariff wars, then we have these scenarios. United States separate itself from the whole world trading systems by such kind of tariff gap. And all the other countries, if they don't fighting with tariff with each other, it means we will have a new world systems. All countries except the United States, they're doing those free trades. And the United States market will replace by some other countries' domestic markets in the world. And the United States, what can United States got in these scenarios? United States will become from an open economy to a closed economy. The only market US production can ensure its domestic markets, and they cannot got enough advantages by either importing or exporting from other countries. That's like a rollback of United States from the 21st centuries to maybe 18th or 17th centuries. United States just isolated from the world and only depend on itself, producing everything and consume everything domestically. Then United States will become isolated, either great or not great powers outside the world systems, and this world become a new world without US superpowers. Did that mean? I think that may be just the opposite side of the market. It means that United States will completely retreat from the United States, from the world, and go back to the domestic or maybe the Western atmosphere to play with self. I think that no one can imagine they can realize such kind of goals from outside. But nowadays, a very active politician in the name of MAGA can realize this self-defeating of US hegemony. We cannot comment on that things. We just say that maybe that's a kind of wisdom of history. The history just like the God looking from above say that, hey, you guys, this is your destiny. You made your own choice. You guys choose these people to become your president and let this president very confidently leading your countries to accelerate downside of so-called US hegemonic systems. Maybe after several years or several decades, when history research today's world, they will feel it's like a joke of history, but it really happened. That thing. Also, people will worry that the only wish from outside, no matter how hard it is, it's your US policy choice. It's your president to make that decisions. But the world wish that we will not suffer too much during that process. We want a very peaceful self-divide the United States from the other world, and then we can have a new balance, have a world without United States in certain ways. But I don't think that process will be stable. And also, I don't have enough confidence on Trump's. The most worried part is Trump's administration did not have enough skills to deliver any kind of proposals they want. Everything they give you are proposals, and their skill is so poor that they can make everything into finally a mess. And in that situations, very pathetic. No one can be really benefit from that situations. Only this guy, they can have enough confidence that I'm a win. And the most impressed me is nowadays I cannot recognize the White House homepages. These White House homepages is just like Trump's personal pages, and everything is challenge these guys, like not the president, but the kind of empires. Hey, you guys, you're winning every day. Every sentence you're saying is kind of winning to you. So we are just providing you the joys.
I was going to say, I mean, I would very much second that perspective. In other words, I mean, what America is doing is basically walling itself away from the rest of the world. In other words, we're attacking on foreign policy grounds or on tariff economic grounds most of the other countries in the world simultaneously. I mean, basically, one of the few major assets America still controls is its control of the world financial system, the US dollar being the reserve currency. And the fact, for example, that at the beginning of the Ukraine war, America froze 300 billion in Russian assets, Russian dollar assets. I mean, it's just exactly the sort of thing that would make the rest of the world very nervous about keeping their financial reserves in the United States. And, there's actually talk right now, obviously, of basically seizing and converting the Russian assets, which, is not something that, normally happens in any sort of previous even world situation. So, again, with America taking all these tremendously self-defeating steps, it's really shocking how, there could be a rapid decline in American soft power, American influence, American economic control over the rest of the world. I mean, it's basically, again, if you have a leadership team running a country that doesn't know what they're doing and take steps that, are just entirely irrational, both in foreign policy and economic terms, I mean, the results could be very bad for the rest of the world, but even worse for the United States. And so, I certainly would second very much the point that the professor was making that, we really just have Trump and his leadership team who don't really know what they're doing on these issues and are taking very, very strongly self-defeating actions on these policies. I mean, again, when Trump came into office promising tariffs, I mean, there was a wide perception that he would target the tariffs against those countries he viewed as hostile to American interests. I mean, for example, American rivals. I mean, the notion of huge tariffs being imposed on Canada and Mexico, our closest and largest trading partners, were just something nobody would have expected. And again, the tariffs coming in and then going out again, being suspended, being reimposed. I mean, it's not the sort of thing that gives business investment any sort of confidence. And I mean, again, you have many countries around the world, the third world countries in particular, that are run by leadership groups that don't really know what they're doing. And to some extent, I think the American government right now has exactly that same sort of problem. And it's much more of a problem for the world if you have that sort of irrational, incompetent leadership team running one of the world's most powerful, important countries like the United States, rather than just, a small third world country. So, I mean, it's just a bad situation for everybody all around, but worst for really the United States on these points. Certainly a very dangerous political time in the United States. In other words, there's actually a lot of concern that, for example, a number of these Trump policies, even take, for example, the issue of tariffs. I mean, tariffs are supposed to be controlled by Congress. Congress passes tariff changes. The president does not have the right to implement tariffs, but using legislation, emergency actions, emergency executive orders, Trump is imposing these tariffs in a way that really isn't legally sound. I mean, the trouble is, over the last 10 or 20 years, or 30 years, America's political system has become more and more fragile, more and more centralized in the presidency. So, for example, you have both Democrats and Republicans, with Trump being the most extreme example, implementing issues through executive order, which is not part of the constitutional system. A number of people have really pointed out on some of these policies, more domestic policies that Trump has tried to implement, Trump basically has been blocked by federal judges. And, a number of people have really raised the issue. What if Donald Trump, as president of the United States, refuses to abide by judicial orders? I mean, it's basically, it would be a breakdown of the American constitutional system. So it's certainly a very dangerous time internally. In other words, you have a very disorganized, sometimes incompetent administration that just is sort of wandering around in all these random directions, taking a lot of policy implementations that are harmful for the United States and certainly for the rest of the world, and following through on them in a way that really circumvents the American legal system. I mean, take, for example, the tariff policy with Canada and Mexico. When Donald Trump came into office the first time, he demanded to renegotiate the NAFTA agreement, the free trade agreement with Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So Canada, Mexico, and the United States agreed to those changes, implemented by Donald Trump. And now when Donald Trump has come in a second time, he's completely ignored all those previous agreements. In other words, it's difficult to work with a country that simply ignores all of its promises, ignores all of its agreements, and does whatever it wants on any policy that comes along. And that's true domestically, but it's also true internationally. So, I mean, it's certainly a very difficult time for the world and for the United States. And, certainly, I mean, a lot of Americans are very concerned over these things. I think it seems to me there's a good possibility what may happen is the backlash of these policies, these economic policies, may be very severe on the American economy. And that may cause, really the destruction of Trump's political support. I mean, one analogy, and this is really not directly related to what we've been talking about, but look at, for example, the focus on cryptocurrencies, bitcoins, meme coins. I mean, Donald Trump, what he basically did was implement a meme coin for himself, where he potentially made hundreds of millions or billions of dollars by getting people to buy these worthless currencies. I mean, it's just bizarre. I mean, if somebody would have told any rational person 10 or 20 years ago that so much of the American financial system right now would be wrapped around basically what amounts to a Ponzi scheme. I mean, cryptocurrency is basically a Ponzi scheme. And, to have an American economic system based on a Ponzi scheme is a very, very dangerous, disastrous policy to follow. And, for example, as far as I know, I think a number of years ago, China, for example, banned cryptocurrencies. And, a lot of very rational American economic figures have said the same thing. I mean, basically, Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme. And, it's just bizarre to have the president of the United States supporting something like that. So I think, at some point, I think the markets may, react so negatively against these irrational American economic policies. The economic backlash may force Trump to change his ways, but, I just don't know exactly when that will happen.
I have some points to say that.
Okay.
I think that it's Robert Kagan in the year maybe 2021 or I think 2021 in Washington Post, he predicted that the United States maybe have a constitutional crisis uh, if Trump rejoined these elections in year 2024. And nowadays, the Trump got to the office, just like Ronald said that maybe nowadays United States not facing a constitutional crisis, but it's a crisis of governance. Because in the very famous movie, The Cat House, it said that disorganized labor. Nowadays in the United States, we have a disorganized federal government. That's the most ridiculous part. I have to use these terms because what Trump doing, in my point of view, is leading a very dangerous futures. We know that U.S. is a federal state. The federal government and the state government, they have a very complicated and sophisticated power systems to ensure that on one side, the state have enough powers to balance the federal powers. On the other side, the federal powers have enough reputation and authorities to ensure that the different states of the United States can act as a single states in the world. But nowadays, what Trump did, his policy is very seriously damage the federal government's capacities to make a balance with the state powers in certain ways. And the other side, those US federal policies deliver just, Ms. Ronald said very important, he just bypassed the Congress, used so-called executive orders or some kind of statements. Those statements did not have a very clear legal positions in the US law systems to deliver his orders and ask those departments to do everything according to those changing mindings of Trump's. And his administration teams is composed by those very loyalty persons represented by the new FBI director, which the most famous for his novels in the name of Saving the Trump King, writing for the children's. Now, the point is the Trump is destroying the federal power systems without a very clear understanding how serious the final result be. Just I agree with Ronald that maybe I just read an article this morning. They say that those CEOs or the economic elites, they are not there to challenge Trump's powers. They just wait and see and wish that the market can providing a strong enough negative feedback to Trump policies. For example, that Dow Jones will fall to 20%. Maybe well, it's a great shock to the White House say that, hey, you guys, you need to wake up from your dreams and everything that and think about these countries and the world is wrong and you need to change your policies. But how about the fact if Trump just refuse to accept it? Because according to his personalities, according to the personalities for those people maybe have enough capacities to affect Trump, represented by Elon Musk or the JD Vance. These guys, they have a very special personalities. If they face a negative fact, the first choice of their reaction, they will reject to recognize the objectiveness. They will keep their ideas. They will believe that to prove their right is more important than everything else. That incoming scenarios make me worry a lot. That means the world will facing a huge crisis potentially, because no matter how we unlikely the Trump's policies, the real fact is United States, its own economic and financial stabilities has very strong effect to the whole world systems. And other countries need to preparing for these potential negative futures. And I'm quite confused or worried whether we can have enough corporations. And maybe one of the, I think there are two hopes. The first is China will become mature and strong enough when the final crisis comes, China can provide enough certainties and stabilities to the world systems, just like Minister Wang just mentioned in this news press conference of our Liang Hui. And another side is wish maybe in certain aspect, those guys inside the United States can timely have some positive input on these administrations to slow down their speeding toward these horrible futures before it's too late. Wish that will come true and wish that we, when the final challenge comes, enough countries from outside from the whole world can launch effective corporations. They can join together to countering back such kind of challenges, but are still very worried about these things. Just I think maybe in the coming 3 or 6 months is very important to find out what finally will be.
I very strongly agree with that. I mean, the whole thing is people have to really realize that America, traditionally, ordinary Americans have become more and more prosperous every generation for hundreds of years. I mean, because of America's natural resources, its isolation from other countries. I mean, basically, America underwent a tremendous rise in the prosperity of the ordinary people for generations. And then about 30 or 40 years ago, it stopped dead. In other words, Americans these days are basically becoming more and more poor, more and more miserable, more and more dissatisfied. And, things like that sometimes reach a breaking point. I mean, the whole reason Donald Trump was elected, we're talking about somebody with no political experience, who was massively outspent by the other side in 2016, where all the media organs were against him. Most of the large portion of the Republican Party was against him. The reason people voted for them was that people were so tremendously dissatisfied with the ruling elites, with the establishment of the United States. And that's also the reason that Trump was now reelected. I mean, there was a sense that the government, the establishment, is completely opposed to the well-being of the ordinary people. And, when that sort of thing goes on for year after year, it really can cause a destabilization of society with tremendously potential explosive consequences. So, again, I really think, I mean, Trump right now, with many of the steps he's taking, if these policies that he's implementing, I think most economists would agree, have a very negative economic impact on ordinary well-being, a fall in the stock market, rise in unemployment, all of those sorts of factors. I think there could be a tremendous popular backlash against all of our ruling American political elites. I mean, I really think America is in a very politically fragile position right now, which is obviously dangerous for the rest of the world. I mean, when you have, basically irrational, incompetent American leaders, behaving in a very bizarre and disorganized way, taking policy steps that don't necessarily make any sense, and with the people getting more and more dissatisfied, I mean, the result could, potentially be an explosion of some sort. And, it's difficult to say what form that explosion would take. But I think, the American government and the American leadership and Donald Trump are really playing with fire on a lot of these issues. So it's certainly a dangerous time for the United States. And because the U.S. is a very large and important country, it's a dangerous time for the rest of the world as well.
I think this discussion is very helpful. And we need more discussions, especially by United States, between United States and China. And the scholar nowadays that we have our special duties, that we need to input more rationalities and more certainties, and so that we can keep a kind of guardrails in certain aspect, at least the guardrails in the intelligence aspect, so that we can ensure that even though we cannot stop those crazy policies inside the United States, we can provide a proper framework to understand it, so that to diminish the potential negative effect to our bilateral relationship as much as possible.
I would certainly agree with that. And I mean, the whole thing is America certainly has many competent, rational people who would be able to do a very effective job of, running parts of our government or running some of these policies, but they're not the individuals who have their hands on power right now. And, in many cases, because they're sort of honest and candid, they're the sort of people who will never get remotely close to power, which is a huge problem for the United States. I mean, we're not a meritocracy. And, sometimes at some point when you pick your political leaders in a very irrational and disorganized way, at some point, the negative consequences end up becoming so overwhelming that they can damage your societies very severely.
And that brings us to the end of this week's edition of China Now, your go-to show for news and in-depth discussions on China and its place in the world. Through this platform, we aim to introduce you to a different perspective, a different culture, and a different way of thinking. We'd love to hear from you, so don't forget to share your thoughts, comments, feedback, and suggestions for the coming episodes of the show via the email provided below. I am Makiza Latifa, and I truly appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. See you same time next week, and until then, let China not be far away from you anymore. Have a fantastic day.